Okay, well, let's just go ahead and get started. We may have a few people join us as we get further into this, but I don't want to waste any of y'all's time tonight. Both Elizabeth and Jeff could probably do this presentation for me. We've had a lot of different meetings over the course of the last 6 or 8 months about common area and how that should be adjusted within the zoning ordinance. So Renee, I'm happy to run through the whole presentation if you like, but if you have particular questions or concerns, happy to kind of go over your specific items too, and we could shortcut this thing a bit if you'd like. So how much, Renee, I don't hate to put you on the spot, but are you familiar with what we've been trying to work towards with the amendment to the common area section of the zoning ordinance?
From what I gather, you're trying to reduce what's mandatory, I guess, to say in different in the different settings. I'm not against reduction. I mean, like my area, we didn't have a common area when our houses were built, and quite frankly, a lot of it is just something that, I don't know, over time, just nobody keeps up anyhow in some places. So I'm not opposed to reducing it. Now, I would say if you're trying to reduce it in apartments or townhouses, that might be a little different, because in those situations, there's really nowhere for them to go. They don't have a yard to play in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me go through the first bit of it, and maybe that'll clarify what we are going to focus on tonight, Renee, is just how it really the definition of common area we are changing a bit, but for the most part, the major changes to this within this amendment really involves single family detached lots and how we create smaller single family detached lots within Chesterfield. So let me just let I'm sure Elizabeth and Jeff know, but Renee, this meeting is recorded. So just so you know that, we'll have this out on our website later this week if you wanted to listen to it again, and we'll have the slides for the presentation available so you could read some of the text that maybe we go through too fast on this presentation. You could go back and see. We are going to have a presentation of this at the public hearing on Tuesday. So this will give you hopefully a little better understanding going into that public hearing as to what changes what we're suggesting within the zoning ordinance regarding common area. First of all, common area is just merely land within a neighborhood designed, developed, and maintained for the use and enjoyment of all the residents. It's commonly owned property, and for the most part, in most neighborhoods these days, newer subdivisions, there's an HOA that's present, and they are in charge and control of maintaining the common area. So it is an opportunity for more than just somebody's backyard or front yard or side yard, that they could have some recreational space or landscaped open space within the project that is shared by everyone in that neighborhood. And, most people call that, in most places I've worked, that goes under the title of open space. But in Chesterfield, we started using common area years and years ago, and we've just kind of stuck with it thus far. And with the new zoning modernization project, ZOMOD, we may be changing the name of common area to something else like amenity space. But for right now, for this ordinance, we're going to stay with common area, and we're trying to clarify and kind of clean up some of the issues that have bogged us down in reference to the use of the definition of common area. What's the next slide? In Chesterfield, there's very limited opportunity to do lots smaller than 12,000 square feet. R12 is really the smallest kind of single family detached lot configuration that we allow by right. And so if you wanted to do a 7,000 square foot lot or a 9,000 square foot lot or a 6,000 square foot lot, your only really option is to do R12 and then do the conditional use plan development option, which is kind of all outlined, in the zoning ordinance in special section of that 19.1-12. And that's what we're really trying to address in this change, is how to amend that portion of the CUPD in relations to lot reduction. You'll hear that comment kind of throughout this project. So, in the past, we used to have R7 and R9 districts. Those were eliminated back in 1997. And so, R12 is the smallest single family detached residential district that we can work with. But we do have the option of doing a CUPD on with R12. So next slide. Next page, I'll do that. So basically, within that section of the zoning ordinance under conditional use plan developments, we give the developers an option, or applicants an option, to do a lot area reduction. And this is what we call 19.112B2B. And in that definition, we say the minimum lot area requirements may be decreased without limitation, provided the land in an amount equivalent to that by which each residential lot or building site is diminished is provided in common area within the development. So in short, what that means is if you're doing an R12 zoning case and you wanted to create, say, a 9,000 square foot lot, you could do so, but that difference between the 12,000 square foot lot that's required with the R12 and the 9,000 square foot lot, the 3,000 square feet, is what you would have to provide that in equivalent common area within the project. And with some of the lot configurations and sizes that developers are wanting to build and people can afford these days within the housing market, even a 12,000 square foot lot's getting to be pretty expensive. The idea of creating some more opportunities for 6,000 square foot lots or 7,000 square foot lots is a market that more and more developers and citizens around Chesterfield are asking to see more activity in that smaller lot configuration market. You go to the next one. So kind of using that as an example to give you an idea of how it normally works. If we were doing a zoning case for an R12 zone district and it was a 100-acre tract of land, this exhibit here kind of shows you what you could create. We've made some assumptions as to how much roadway would be necessary within that 100 acres and essentially how much RPA might be existing within that area. And what we've come up with is, just doing standard R12 on 100 acres with approximately, 10.5 acres of that being RPA and, maybe another 20% of the site made up of streets and so forth. You've got about 67 acres of developable land for lots within a 100-acre tract of land. And so if you were doing, R12 lots, you do not currently have to provide any common area for straight zoning of R12. So you don't, in this particular exhibit, all you see is, 12,000 square foot lots essentially with roads. And some of these lots have, a substantial amount of RPA included privately on their lot. And, but, they can't build obviously within that RPA area. So this, this type of general layout for R12, you can create about 245 lots plus or minus. You're getting about a density of about 2 to 2.5 per acre. And this is what, it could lay out. And you don't really see anything that really is commonly shared by any of the property owners. Everybody's just got their individual lot. But the number you need to kind of cue in on is, it produces about 245 lots this way. So once you go to the next exhibit. So say the developer wanted to do 6,000 square foot lots and they were going to use the R12 zoning district. Here's what they essentially would have to agree to in order to create those 6,000 square foot lots. They'd have to do an R12 CUPD, and within that, they'd have to be creating, the RPA is the same as the previous example, but in this one, we were keeping it all as outside of private ownership. It's all in common ownership on this exhibit. But this particular layout at 6,000 square foot lots, you could essentially get about 277 lots within that same 100-acre configuration. And basically doing the math of that many lots at 6,000 square feet creates a need for of about 38 acres of common area within that 100 acres. So you only started with 100, you already have 10 acres of that, basically 10 and a half of the acres of that in RPA, and now you have to get 38 more acres in common area somewhere on the project. And so this kind of shows how traditionally we've required people to provide that much common area with it for a 6,000 square foot lot. And at the end of the day, all you're really creating is 277 lots as opposed to the 245 lots that you got using R12. So, you're only gaining 32 lots by doing this type of particular layout. And I think what we've heard time and time again is that's just too much of a take in reference to common area for the creation of 6,000 square foot lots. So next slide. So after taking a lot of looks at different subdivisions within Chesterfield and other areas of the country and talking to numerous developers here and in other places, as well as some planning consultants and so forth, and meeting with some of our local developers and builders, staff did a hard look at, what could that number, that equivalency, could we really change that 1-to-1 equivalency number down to something else that would maybe be more realistic and still provide plenty of useful common area within a single family detached project. And we came up with the idea that we could cut that common area requirement in half from 1-to-1 down to 1 to 50%. So, if you were, for example, if you were still building that 9,000 square foot lot and you had the 3,000 square feet remainder, you'd only have to provide 1,500 square feet of common area as opposed to the 3,000 for that type of project. But this is and so that's you may think that's a really big reduction in common area. And it is, but it's still a very reasonable suggestion. And the other part that we were very interested in getting from a staff standpoint was that of that common area that you're committing to, you're dedicating that 50%, 30% of that land, that common area has to be common area that must be conveniently located within the development and not located along the perimeter of the development, and shall be identified as strategic common area. So we've made a kind of a subcategory within common area, that's strategic common area, and that is the more usable and more centralized in most cases common areas that we are trying to encourage to be designed within single-family detached projects. So it's a combination of, okay, we're cutting it in half, but with cutting it in half, we're also getting a commitment from the developer to create more useful and centralized, to the most extent, common area within the neighborhood itself. We got a couple exhibits to show you later on, but that's the trade-off that's being offered with this new recommended amendment to 19.112B 2B. Next slide. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
So within that, you would not include any shared use path. Would not be included in common area, whatever square footage you would have for shared use.
We would allow the shared use path to be part counted towards the common area, and that's where we're trying to encourage that type of pedestrian involvement within within common areas. So that is part of it. In a minute, we're going to have a new definition of common area, and within that, you're going to see kind of a list of things that would count towards our definition of common area.
Right, but required shared use path along road frontage, is that also included in your 50%?
It's an option. I mean, if there was a particular plan that showed that the developer needed to put a bike or trail plan along their the perimeter of their project, that would count towards the common area. We're trying not to get too heavy-handed in telling the developer what kind of common area they have to provide. We're giving them a kind of a menu of things they can pick from, and depending on their project, they could do a pool, they could do just a walking path, they could just have a nice pocket park with trees and grass, if that's the design that they wanted to include. Not necessarily say, you know, you, Mr. Developer, you have to put a trail from point A to point B within your project. There may be instances where that shows up on the bike and trail plan, and yes, we're going to, just like the thoroughfare plan, we're going to try to work with the developer to get that linkage so that we can continue to have a better network of trails throughout, you know, neighborhood to neighborhood. But just to say to the developer, hey, you've got to put trails in all this common area isn't part of what we're proposing or requiring with this.
I was more thinking along the line of, if you have a development that has road frontage on every side and the requirement is a shared use path along road frontage, that's a lot of land that's already taken up. So that could be a benefit to everybody if it's included in the common area.
Yeah,
well, get your shared use path along there, but like I said, you know, I guess it depends on the size of the property, how much land would actually be used if they had to put a shared use path on all four sides of it.
I thought your question was, would we be making the developer do a shared use path? And I'm saying it's an option, but it's not something we would demand that they have to do on every project. But if they did want to use a trail along the perimeter, that could count as common area. That is one of the elements that is counted as common area. it would, unless it's, and I'll get into this a little later, unless it's actually specified on the bike and trail plan, county plan, we wouldn't count it as strategic common area, which
Okay.
is part of that more valuable 30.
Okay,
But
I thought everything had to have shared use plan, shared use path that was along a road
no,
as
I
part of
mean,
the
we
trail.
have a
Okay.
sidewalk requirement, but not necessarily a shared use path everywhere.
Okay.
No.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Okay. So basically, we have a new definition for what a strategic common area. That's a new subset of the common area that's going to be part of the zoning ordinance, and we'll be adding that to this section of the zoning ordinance. And the exhibit there is just to kind of show you an example of the type of kind of centralized open space or common area that we are trying to encourage developers to try to put into their projects that would be more useful for a larger percentage of their property owners than maybe just a perimeter trail around the edge of their property next to the RPAs. We see, those type of perimeter trails fairly frequently, and they're a great asset, but we don't want that to be the only kind of common area, we see in Chesterfield too. We wanted to see more of this kind of centralized, usable common area that could be used to kick a ball or have, some sort of family activity right there in the middle of the neighborhood, as opposed to just a walking trail next to the creek or RPA. Okay. Next slide. And then these are just some examples of the different kinds of strategic common area that we've got. We've got, playgrounds, of course, would count. Pools and community buildings would count. We'd have, the idea of a community garden would be an eligible strategic common area example. The pavilions, definitely. Next slide. But it could also be, more kind of passive things, such as, just a trail system through the middle of the subdivision, or a wooded area, maybe in the more centralized, convenient location within the project, or it could be a more landscape pocket park, or, it could be just kind of a little stand of grass with a, small bandstand that's could be used by everybody. So we're trying to provide a pretty broad and flexible list of things that count as strategic common area, but trying to make sure that it's not just the perimeter. It's not just perimeter common area for each project. Next slide. So here is the definition that we came up with for strategic common area, and I'm not sure I really need, I'll go ahead and just read the whole thing so you'll hear what it is. The portion of the common area requirement that provides a centralized and other strategic location within the project that has good pedestrian access and conveniently serves the majority of the residential units within the development. Strategic common area should provide the community residents with an opportunity for high quality aesthetic and/or active outdoor amenities. And then, we're saying that perimeter trails, buffers and trails within the project shall not be eligible to be considered for strategic common area. That 30% kind of subset, that the perimeter trails and buffers would not count towards that unless those trails are identified in the Chesterfield County Bikeways and Trails Plan. And if they are, then they could count 15-foot width of that trail, of the official trail pathway, may be included in the overall strategic common area calculation. And then as kind of a just to make sure we still keep a good portion of the area as good centralized strategic common area throughout this project, we're saying that no more than 50% of that strategic common area requirement could be claimed by such a trail. So if there was a situation where there was, a 3,000-foot portion of this identified Chesterfield County Bikeways Trail along a proposed subdivision, if the 3,000 times 15 added up to be more than 50% of the required strategic common area that they were required to provide for this project, they could only count that 50% of it. That's all that's in there for. And there was, some discussion as to making sure, there may be, like there always are, exceptions to the rules. There may be a particular piece of property where the identification of this strategic common area might be located along the perimeter, but it's between two neighborhoods, and maybe there's some real value or aesthetic value to why they want to count this as their strategic common area. That could be, requested by me to make a determination if it could count towards the strategic common area, and I would make that determination. So gives a little bit of flexibility for making sure, there could be some adjustments made to that, what strategic common area. But that first paragraph is really what I'm going to fall back on to see if we're meeting the spirit and intent of that first paragraph to count it as strategic common area. Let's go to the next slide. So, okay, so that was the smaller subset strategic common area definition. This is the new definition of common area that we're proposing within the zoning ordinance. The old definition within the current zoning ordinance was a fairly convoluted definition that had some contradictions in it and really made it hard to make some interpretations as to what counted and what didn't count. So we tried to make a real strong effort to kind of clean all that up and make it clear once and for all what things would count as common area as future projects came forward. And this is the kind of list of bullets that we came up with. Preserved natural areas required by zoning conditions is, obvious one that we would include. Buffers exclusive of those required by the ordinance. So say there is a particular buffer that the developer is proposing voluntarily between two single-family neighborhoods, and he's offering say a 20-foot buffer between those two. That is not required by ordinance to provide. It's something extra that he's providing for the project, and so that would count as common area. And then the pedestrian accessible buffer. So if there was, say, a required buffer, a 35-foot setback buffer along a roadway, and the developer decided to put a trail or some sort of pedestrian access through that required buffer, all that required buffer would then be eligible to be counted as part of the common area requirement. Also pedestrian accessible natural ponds, active and passive recreational areas, including but not limited to, walking and bike paths. We did have a lot of conversation as to, making sure that only really a portion of the RPA could count towards the common area requirement. Sometimes these RPAs, as you know, Renee, could be hundreds of acres in size, and the idea that just because you run a little trail encroaching into maybe a 200-acre RPA, you shouldn't get the whole 200-acre RPA to count towards your common area requirement. So what we're saying is if that trail does, encroach within the RPA, you get 100-foot width of that RPA to count towards your common area requirement, and everybody felt that was a fairly reasonable concession to make. Playgrounds, swimming pools, dog parks, clubhouses, community gardens, athletic courts of any sort, outside gathering areas, even parking lots and buildings accessory to, say, a pool area or maybe a clubhouse we would count those areas as common area also. We did kind of draw the line with the stormwater management, the BMPs. If the developer would say put a trail around the edge of a BMP and provide some amenities around that, the idea that that stormwater BMP could count except for the actual kind of sloped areas and the water surface area of the BMP. That part we weren't going to count as part of your common area. Yep. So kind of going back to the original example that we gave, the 100-acre tract that at just straight R12, you could get the 245 lots out of that. And really there's nothing shared from neighbors to neighbors in reference to open space within this particular project, but it's still a doable way of developing larger lots in Chesterfield. And then the next one kind of shows where we are currently with the zoning ordinance, where you have, over 38 acres of land that ends up being dedicated to common area, but may not really be that quality oriented of common area. And you could create with this, this is the one-to-one equivalency part of it. So for every square foot you're reducing in the size of the lot, you're having to provide a square foot in common area. It really, you can only get with this type of formula and trying to create 6,000 square foot lots, you could maybe squeeze in 277 lots with our current ordinance. And with what we're proposing now, what you would be getting with that same 100 acres is the possibility of creating up to maybe 350 acre units or lots within this. But as you can see, we've got more strategic common area kind of spread out. That's what you see in kind of the dark green is that 30% strategic common area requirement, in addition to what you see in kind of the lime green and lighter green colors that are shown on the exhibit. So all that 50-foot buffers, we're counting those as part of the common area, and with a trail running with those, and then having maybe some extra common area close to the RPA area that you see there. So all of that would add up to the requirement of 24 acres of common area using the new formula that we have, and that we would have with this new formula right at I think it was 7.2 acres of strategic common area within this project. So, from a staff standpoint, we really liked the addition of adding this new requirement of 30% strategic common area, because we start to see kind of more usable common area included into the design of single family detached neighborhoods with the smaller lot configuration, the idea of having a small usable common area or pocket park nearby where kids could, walk down to and kick a ball and spend a little time there would be a much more useful type of common area than just having kind of a larger expanse of common area that maybe doesn't have any improvements in it at all. So the next slide. So you basically, with the existing R12, you get the 245 lots. With the new addition or amendments that we're proposing, you could create possibly up to 350 lots. So that's an increase of about 105 lots within the same 100 acres. And you're still getting, really, in I think staff's opinion, really a better quality neighborhood on the right than you're seeing really on the left, with more usable common area throughout the neighborhood. So I think that's it. That's just the same definition we went over already. If you have any questions, go to the next slide there. So these are the changes specifically that we're making to the ordinance on Tuesday night. We're going to be revising 19.112B 2B, that CUPD section that I read earlier on. That part where we're going from the 1-to-1 equivalency to the 1 to 0.5 equivalency. And then we're going to be revising the definition of common area, cleaning it up and making it much more clarified and defined as to what counts as common area. And then we're adding this new definition of strategic common area to go along with the new requirement of 30% strategic common area that we're including in 19.112B2B.
I do have a question.
Sure.
When you have a lot, you're looking at 100 acres, that's your example. What if you only have, say, 5 acres and you want to subdivide it to put something on there? Is there a minimum to what your requirements pick? Because say if you only have 5 acres, putting common area in it, it's going to take up land that may or may not necessarily make a difference as to whether or not you can get another house on it. I'm just thinking about, there's a lot of properties around the county for infill.
Yeah.
You got 2, 3, 4, 5 acres that probably is already sitting in the middle of a subdivision that doesn't have any common area. And then now you're going to be requiring it for those, however many houses you can get on, that much parcel.
And Renee, you make a good point. Honestly, with what changes we're making here, this really doesn't help a really small infill kind of situation. I would think you'd have to have at least, 10 acres, if not 20 acres to really, make this small lot reduction amendment kind of work for you. But this was an opportunity for us to try to make some changes now to allow developers and builders to still create some smaller lot configurations before the new ZOMOD comes out. With ZOMOD next year, our hope is we will have some opportunities where that infill project that you're talking about would make sense, and we would be reducing the common area requirement for maybe some of those infill sites of less than, like your question of 5 acres. I mean, the idea of forming an HOA just to have, that, half an acre or less than a half an acre become the common area may not make a whole lot of sense for the houses that get built in that. But we haven't really addressed that quite yet. I think it's on our list of things to accomplish with ZOMOD, but with this particular kind of simple tweak to the zoning ordinance that we currently have, we still would be requiring the 1-to-1 equivalency requirement if you were trying to do smaller lots on that 5 acres, and you would have to do the 30% strategic common area requirement too. And it may become a pretty minimal piece of property for a small infill project that could be very easily maintained by a very small HOA or some sort of a way of maintaining it.
So you couldn't put like a limit on here, 20, well, maybe 11 acres and above or 10 acres and above? Or
yeah, I would, we could, but I mean, at this point, we don't see a lot of, infill projects like that yet. And so until we really saw that demand occurring, I really would kind of try to stay away from putting a minimum size eligibility on this one.
But you always have the ability to say we're not going to require this, don't you?
Well, if you came through and you're doing an R12 SUP and it's for a 5-acre tract of land and you're not going to be able to make the common area requirement, we would have to figure out trying to get a special exception, I guess, to that for that particular piece of property and get that approved by the planning commission is, the only way I know that we could maybe work our way around that, but we haven't really seen that small of infill sites come forward yet.
I just there was one down at across the street from the school off of Dundas. He subdivided 3 lots and they made him plant trees because it was now considered a subdivision. And the thing is, the regulation for that, he planted the trees, but he just happened to plant them where it obscured your vision of seeing what's coming down Dundas. But, he had to plant trees, so that's what he did. So it's just trying to think of the things that will keep that type of stuff from, happening on any kind of small parcel. Plus the cost of trying to get an exception,
Renee, if you don't mind, I know kind of in working with Renee, I know she's kind of focused at trying to stimulate redevelopment on Route 1.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of smaller lots on Route 1. And so, I think my perspective is we've either the industry's got to, tackle it through the zoning ordinance so that we can continue to attract people to Route 1 to say, hey, we want to make it by right and easy for you to take an old 3-acre, 5-acre tract along Route 1 and do something different with it. Or Renee, like you said, when you're recruiting people, when you're finding those opportunities, I think talk to staff and see what they can do to help that person get through the zoning process, with a CUPD, where it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because like you said, the project that small, we probably have, in order to get somebody in there to undertake that effort and that risk, probably need staff's help in moving it through, because that type of project's not going to have the revenue to support
Right.
me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's, you look at some of the numbers that come out of a 5-acre tract that you're doing that, and you've got, 10 to 15 houses that you're creating. I mean, all you have is a less than a 1/3 acre type of common area. It's not unheard of and all you have is kind of a turfed area with some trees with a park bench. That's not a heavy lift for 15 houses to support on an annual basis. Maybe the mowing of that one lot that became a park and more a centrally located common area and keeping the bench intact. That could be a pretty minimal type of strategic common area or common area that we would be a very appropriate for a small infill site like that. I think we could make something like that work. It would. I do think with Zomod, we're going to come up with maybe some other options with some of the new zoning districts that might help infill sites a little bit more than this particular adjustment to the existing zoning ordinance.
So this ordinance will be in place you're going to use this in the Zomod, or will it change again?
It'll it'll probably change again. A lot of the same kind of thoughts and probably the elements that we've outlined and what common area is and what strategic common area, those type of elements will be brought into the new ZOMOD. But I think the idea, we're trying to get away from the whole, CUPD concept for the new ZOMOD anyway. So the idea of having the 1-to-1 equivalency or the 1 to 0.5 equivalency isn't something we're probably going to continue to have within the new zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
We'll have it built more into the actual new districts that we have rather than as a kind of a custom exemption that we're working around, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was just trying to think of means to get people to build newer homes smaller, so you have, we don't have any starter homes anymore. We got people like myself who have a home that, was full of kids that's not there anymore, but don't want to move. And then, you've got families of 4 that need or families of 2 or 3 that need a smaller starter home that they're not existent anymore.
Right. Well, I think, part of the comments we've heard from the builders in this area is the demand for some smaller housing opportunities in the single family detached category is something that's really needed, and it's just not cost effective to put a 1,500 square foot house on a 15,000 square foot lot. It's just it's
Right.
too expensive. So you have to put a 4,000 square foot house on it just to basically make the land pay for itself. So the idea of trying to find a way to make it a bit more cost effective to create 6,000 square foot lots so that you could put maybe a 1,500 square foot new house on it is part of the goal of why we attempted this particular amendment to the zoning ordinance. And it's just a quick fix to the existing ordinance, and more to come with ZOMOD.
See what kind of problems you have in the meantime.
Hopefully more successes than problems, but we'll see.
You never know what happens until you change it.
Yeah, I know, but if you got to try to change things to make things better too. So I think we're very comfortable with what's being proposed. I don't think we're giving anything away that we shouldn't, and the idea of the 30% strategic common area requirement really does, I think, going to work toward the benefit of creating more sustainable small lot neighborhoods in the long run. Yeah, and we'll try to build some of that into ZOMOD, but the idea of some of the smaller infill sites, we're still going to have to figure out where the cutoff might be for some of those things.
Yep. All right.
All right. Any other questions?
I think that'll do it.
Elizabeth or Jeff, do you have any comments or things you want to bring up that maybe I didn't touch on that we've talked about over the last couple of months?
If it's okay, I'd just like to say thank you to you and your staff to being open to the conversation. And, this kind of hearing from us and listen, incorporating this now, and then the efforts you're doing to update the zoning ordinance through ZOMOD to reflect, how people want to live. And I think really from what I've seen so far of your efforts on ZOMOD is to give us different tools to use in different parts of the county. Kind of to Renee's point, what I think what she needs in Route 1 might be a little bit different than what's needed in the western end of the county.
Right.
And so, I appreciate your all's time and effort and willingness to go through this exercise with zone mod and look at the updates. And Renee, if you know, you may not know, Henrico updated their ordinance last year, and they're you do the best you can, and we're going through it and finding things that need to be corrected, typos and things like that, and they're just keeping a list of everything that needs to be fixed, and they'll just do one big fell swoop amendment to kind of clean it up at some point. So I think like you said, we got to test once we do our best. Staff does their best to draft it the right way, and then we got to test it. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, didn't realize that.
Yeah.
We just do a cleanup.
Andy,
Yeah,
I just
never-
want to, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just, it's always hard to follow Jeff because he's always so thoughtful in his comments, but thank you for everything that you and your staff have done to work with the development community on bringing us to where we are. And I know that there's a lot more work to do with ZoMod, and we're grateful to be a part of the discussion. And I agree with Jeff, we've got to look at different areas of the county differently. But I like where Renee's going with some of this smaller lot talk. It's something that, we've briefly touched on through ZoMod conversations. So I think there's a lot more ground to cover, and I'm excited to be a part of that and very grateful for you and your staff working with us.
Sure. I think it's been a good effort, and I think, we had some pretty strong discussions over the months, and I think we came up with a pretty good compromise, and everyone kind of gave a little and came up with I think a pretty good option for how to deal with common area, at least for the time being.
Andy, I don't know if I'll be able to be at the meeting Tuesday. I think I have a conflict that night, but if I'm not, I will put some comments in the portal.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thanks, guys. You guys have a good evening.
You
Appreciate
too.
it.
But
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.